Good afternoon to you all. Welcome. My name's Andrew Lasowski. I'm the senior books editor at the Huffington Post, and we are here to talk about reading. Yay! Let's give me a yay for books. Thank you. You're all very good. So I'll introduce the panel in a second. As you have probably seen the panel, we're here to discuss book clubs, but really all a book club is a way of people to come together to talk about reading. And every book club has one thing in common. What's different about every book club is what that thing is. Book clubs gather sometimes because they're all fans of a particular author or a particular genre. It might be a location. It might be a medium that you all participate in. It could be that you all work in the same place, you all live in the same street. But from that one thing in common, using books creates a way of having a common experience to have a much bigger conversation. And so to talk about some of the ways in which that conversation can develop, the ways in which it has been changing with the use of modern tools, and the experience as an author to see people discuss your books and what groups discussing your work can actually bring to the work and your understanding of it, we have this wonderful selection of people here. So starting closest to me, this is Anne-Marie Dooling. She is a digital journalist and community manager. We have Elizabeth Gilbert, who most famously author of Eat, Pray, Love, and has a new book coming out, which I'm sure she will tell us all about as part of this. We have Wally Lamb, also has a book coming out about which we must hear. And Michelle Filgate, who is the community manager at the Community Bookstore in New York. So, thank you. Yeah, please welcome them. So, let's start from the author's perspective. Elizabeth immediately pushing the questions over to Wally. Well, in that case, we'll start with Wally. Well, in fact, both of you have many things in common, but one of them is that you have both been benighted and touched by the Holy Oprah Book Club and during its heyday. Can you tell us a little bit, Wally, about what that was like, and also generally what your experience with book clubs has been?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I have to go back to 1992, pre-Oprah's book club, to a morning when, no, it was an evening. My wife was finishing dinner. I was moving laundry from the washer to the dryer, and the phone rang, and one of my kids, my kids were never too famous for telephone manners, jumped to the phone. It was ringing. Yup, nope, yup, Dad. And so I go to the phone, and the person says, "Is this Wally?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "What are you doing, Wally?" And I said, I'm doing laundry." And she said, "Ha ha ha ha." And I said, "Who is this?" She says, "Well, this is Oprah Winfrey." And I suspect she doesn't have to do her own laundry, Oprah. But anyway, I'm thinking to myself, thank God I didn't say it, but I'm thinking to myself, yeah, right, lady, you're Oprah and I'm Geraldo Rivera. You know? But it really was she. It was just too good an imitation. So anyway, she had just finished reading She's Come Undone that had just come out. And she was calling, she said, to thank me for having written the book. She said, reading saved my life when I was a kid, and I'm still an avid reader. And when I read a book that I really like, I love to track down the author if I can and say thanks. And also, in my case, that I owed her 2 nights' sleep. So it was just a lovely call. It didn't really have anything to do with the show. And then she calls 5 years later. I was just sort of marginally aware that this book club thing had started and it was causing a sensation. And she called again, and I had no fantasy that she would remember my little book, but she did. And then all of a sudden it was like, whoa, a ride on the roller coaster. Very exciting, a little intimidating. And then I was very fortunate. The second time that she picked me was the following year. In the meantime, I had been writing my second novel, and it just came out. So the first book was selected in 1997, but it was published in 1992. And then, I know this much is true, my second novel was published in 1998. Now, I have to say that at this point, I'm experienced as an Oprah Book Club author, and so I know that when Oprah makes the call, you are sworn to secrecy. The only problem with that was the second pick is that I was I was in my hotel room doing media for this book that was just coming out, and I was talking to the Book of the Month Club editor, and so Oprah calls during that interview to say that, and I said, oh, thank you, ma'am, but I really can't talk right now. I'm in the middle of an interview. Could you call me back in 15 minutes? And she laughed, and she said, yeah, I'll call you back in 20, ha, ha, ha. So the interview ends. I walk this very nice editor out to the elevators in the hotel. We wave goodbye. I go running back down the hall, and I had locked myself out of my hotel room. And then the elevator wouldn't work, so I'm running down all these flights of stairs, running back up, and I sat by that damn telephone for the next hour and a half.
I thought you were going to say year.
Yeah. Yeah, that hotel bill got expensive.
Just get your mail forwarded.
So anyway, I thought to myself, if she doesn't ever call back, I'm just not going to mention it to the publisher. You know? But she did. Now, as far as book clubs, I'll tell you about my worst experience as a book club guest. It was my first, and I went to discuss She's Come Undone. It was shortly after it had come out. And first of all, they had this lovely retired couple who were Shakespeare experts and academics, right? And they did for about an hour and a half of scenes from various Shakespeare plays, and I'm thinking to myself, what the hell am I doing here? You know? But anyway, I eventually went on, and the discussion was, I listened more than spoke, and then one young woman said, so I think probably what you're trying to say at the end of your novel is that this loser has found herself a whole bunch of other losers to be with. Oh. And I'm like, you know, it's a good thing that I didn't jump over the couch and throttle her, because I felt so defensive for these characters who had, you know, certainly driven me crazy, but I had learned to love them over those years. And, you know, how dare this little snippet say something like that about my characters. Since then, I've had wonderful experiences with book clubs, but that was the first awful one. Yeah.
That's a great range right there. Well, Liz, I mean, what is it like as an author to gather together with a group of people and have them dissect what they've just read and spent so long with, and to talk with you about it?
That's such a good question. Can you all hear me in my giraffe costume?
That's a great dress.
Thank you. I just realized that I look like a giraffe, and now I'm self-conscious. But we're talking about book clubs. So it's a wonderful look. I mean, people write for different reasons. I'm a populist as a writer. I'm a populist as a person. Everybody is invited. You know, I don't write to exercise my demons privately. I don't write for critics. I don't not write for them, but that's not who I'm thinking about. I write for readers who are often in the room with me when I'm writing. It's a sort of a conversation that I'm having with the reader the whole time that I'm writing the book. I'm asking them if they're coming along with me, sort of imagining them there and saying, you like this? Are we going in the right direction here? It's a kind of invisible collaboration. And so when that invisible collaboration is made visible, it's so deeply rewarding to me, because that was the whole point. You know, the book isn't for me. It's for you. It's for the person who wants to go on a story. So I find it very wonderful. And I should say that prior to my brush with Oprah, I think I knew every one of my readers by name, because there weren't that many of them, and I appreciated them so much, and we sent Christmas cards to each other. You know, there were 11 of them, and one of me, and I tried very hard to know all of them. You know, but it wasn't difficult. When you go to a reading and 6 people come, you can really get to know them, go out for a drink afterwards and talk. And I remember when Eat, Pray, Love first came out, a friend of my sister's in Philadelphia said that a friend of hers had just read it and really liked it, and could I come to her house and talk to her friends? And I would say yes to anything like that. I want to have that kind of communion. The tricky thing is, after it reaches a certain point and you don't know all of your readers by name anymore, and you can't go to their houses anymore, you have to find different ways to communicate with them. So I've sort of missed some of that intimacy. But of course, I'm grateful for the numbers as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great point you raise actually there as well, of once it scales up, how then you continue that conversation using some of the different tools or platforms, whether online or in person, whether it's events like this or events in a different kind of space. Actually, Anne-Marie, this is something that I think you can speak to. I mean, speaking as someone who works a lot using communities online and different platforms, what do you feel are some of the strengths and weaknesses in trying to discuss books with authors?
So we ran the Huffington Post Book Club throughout 2012, and that was definitely one of our biggest problems. We have 4 million unique users on the Huffington Post. We want to discuss books with all of them. How do you do that? So we were very lucky to be able to have a very simple commenting platform, and of course social media, which takes everything, every single discussion to another level, because you are connecting with people, as I like to say, in their homes. Because when you're on Facebook, you see your feed, you're comfortable, you're at home, you're sort of in an area where you're more receptive to read things. So social media is really fantastic for that. And like I said, we just had our own commenting platform, but there are several different online platforms people can use if you feel like you need to have a more interactive book club, not just in person. Things like Discourse, GroupMe, Branch, these are really simple tools where you can just put a question up, invite your friends and see how they feel, discuss topics with them, add photos, and have more of a long-form discussion, which I think really honestly took the Huffington Post Book Club to another level. We could sit there and discuss the books at length all we wanted, but what really made it the community as strong as it was that we were able to invite readers to write long-form prose really on what they connected to in the book. It wasn't just a matter of, here's what I think and here's my analysis of the character. It was, we read Karl Marlantes' What It's Like to Go to War, and we had a beautiful post by a woman whose husband went to war. Nothing to do with the book whatsoever, but the story connected with her in such a way. And I think that's really what you want to look for. Whatever platform is comfortable for you to discuss your personal connection with the book.
Yeah, and it's great as well when that then can go back to the author, and so the sort of reactions that you see either in person or online. I mean, do you both follow what people write about your work online much? Is that a terrifying thing to do? Is that something that you like to do?
Those Amazon reviews can be a little terrifying. I only look at those if I'm having like 2 bad weeks in a row, and then it makes it worse. No, but I must say that I resisted Facebook for a long time, and then my agent said, you're getting to be a dinosaur about all this stuff. So I went on, sort of reluctantly. Love it. It's like, and I particularly like the interactiveness of it, so much so that when I reach I think they limit you at 5,000 or something people, and then so I said to myself, or somebody who knows more than this stuff said, oh, you need like a professional page. So I said, but I don't want to let go of all these people who I've been interacting with, and Facebook, said, your friends will migrate. I think will migrate,
like
and then
Jones.
My friends didn't. I just lost all these friends, and I missed so much the back and forth of it all that now I have 2 Facebook pages, and I don't go to the professional one as often as I go to the interactive one. I just really like those kinds of exchanges. I'm a little bit probably too much of a wise guy with it, but I have a lot of fun doing it. And of course, it's a great procrastination strategy as well.
Oh yeah, yes, one of the best. I actually, exactly like you, vehemently resisted until only last August, and now I don't know why I didn't do it before, because I genuinely love it. And I feel like it's the nicest way that I have to communicate with my readers. Mm-hmm. And I don't know now what I would do if the first thing I didn't do every morning was take that time to answer those questions. I find it very moving. Mm-hmm. I find it very intimate. And I find it like it's wonderful to sort of pose questions. Like I bring questions and then everybody starts dialogues. And speaking of book clubs, one thing that I just did last week on Facebook, I had a book giveaway contest, and I asked people to write a little essay about who their favorite heroine of literary history was. And out of the 600 responses, 250 of them were Jane Eyre, which made me realize I had never read Jane Eyre. And so I gave the book to the person who wrote the nicest Jane Eyre essay, and then I committed myself to reading Jane Eyre. And then I was like, well, why should I just do this? So I invited everyone. And so now we're having a Jane Eyre book club on my Facebook page.
How cool.
So we're not talking about my book, we're talking about Charlotte Bronte. So everyone is meeting on my Facebook page on June 8th, and all day we will do nothing but talk about Jane Eyre. So there's like a couple thousand people all over the world who are having this wonderful conversation, and it's, I love it.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. It's a beautiful system, and I feel dumb that I was like pushed against it for so long.
Can I just jump in, because something that you said a couple of answers ago, it was really interesting to me, and how you write for readers and to take them along with you. And I had a problem when I was doing that. I was, after the Oprah phenomenon and its effect on me and my readership was such a wonderful thing. It became terrifying to me. When I started my third novel, suddenly I have these millions of readers who are expecting me to write something, that they're going to like, and it really shut me down. But what saved me eventually, after months of struggle, was I remembered what one of my first writing teachers said to me, and I had just been writing short stories. And I was working with in an MFA program with a great writer named Gladys Swan. And she said to me, well, Wally, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to write fiction? Well, I had never asked myself that before, so I had to make up an answer on the spot. And I said, well, every year, I'm a former high school teacher. I said, every year when I teach To Kill a Mockingbird, I find that after about the first chapter, the kids start to read it because they want to, not because they have to. And so I said, I guess I'd like to write a book for, my teenage population that they're going to want to read voluntarily. Well, for something, that I was making up on the spot, I thought that was a pretty damn good answer. Yeah. But Gladys made a face, and it was not a pleasant one. And she said, when you're writing fiction, don't write for a preconceived audience, she said, because what you need to do is to write for yourself, write what you need to write. And so, okay, that proved to me, for me only, to be good advice. But I had forgotten that. Suddenly, with this big readership, I was very intimidated. And so I literally one day got up out of my chair in my office, and I opened the door, and I said goodbye to all these imagined people who were waiting for me to write something, that they were going to love, and I had to sort of, escort them all out and then be alone with myself. Now, that said, when I get finished with a book, and it's sort of out there, now I want to talk to everybody about it.
Yeah. You just couldn't have them all in the room with you.
Right.
2 million people. Like,
right.
How's it going?
Yeah. You're not done yet?
Yeah.
It's a really interesting question about how interacting with readers then happens once a book comes out. Michelle, community bookstore, it's in the name of the bookstore. You have this community with whom you speak a lot on social media, online, and then in person. What is it that you feel makes a successful book club event sort of in the store? And how much does discussion with readers outside of that sort of factor into that?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. Most bookstores, including the bookstore I work at, which is in Park Slope in Brooklyn, have established book clubs that the store hosts. So for instance, at my store, we have 3 different book groups. One of them has been meeting for a long time. It's the Community Bookstore Book Club. Stephanie Valdez, the co-owner of the store, runs it. And they read a mixture of classics and contemporary books as well. And I think what makes it work is that it's a group of people coming together who aren't necessarily like-minded, who might have very different tastes in what they want to read. But because they're able to come together and and discuss their different thoughts on what they're reading, and sometimes, and a lot of times, disagree. There is a community that forms around that. There are people who want to continue to come back to this group and see, well, maybe this person didn't like this book last month, but this next book that we're reading, why should I read this? And I also think that there are a lot of things that bookstores can offer book groups, not just book groups that are held in the store, but your own book groups. We offer, we're really good at hand selling and recommending books to readers. That's what our job is. That's what we love to do. And in fact, a lot of bookstores have lists of books that they specifically recommend for book clubs. There's an IndieBound, which is the American Booksellers Association's website. Every month around the country, independent booksellers submit their picks of the books that are coming out and write blurbs about why you should read that book. So that list is available in most stores, and it's also available online for readers to find out about fantastic books.
I would love to add something to that. I think when we were running our interactive book club, it was very important to also have a live element at the end of some of the books that people were just so passionate about.
Yeah.
And for me, picking a specific book club to go along with that discussion was almost as important as picking the book, because the book club was like having another member of the book club there, having it in the bookstore. And I know when we had our event with Carl Marlantes at Elliott Bay, people were just emailing us and putting notes on Facebook to say, I love that store. I'm so glad that you're going to support them and have them support you. And actually, we put it up on Facebook on the main Huffington Post Facebook page, which has like 2 million users at this point. And someone said, this is across the street from my house. I'm coming over now. It was amazing.
And actually, I want to add something on that, which is I used to run events at a bookstore in New Hampshire called River Run Bookstore. And both Wally and Elizabeth came and did these huge off-site events at this place called the Music Hall. And one of the things that really worked is that we worked with the local book groups and got galleys of the books, and they were able to read the book before the event, and then they were invited afterwards to these VIP receptions to get to meet the authors. So that's another way to get to work with your local bookstore and try to get some perks like that.
And publishers, I think, more and more see the value of book clubs to sort of get the word out. And so I think they've been pretty generous with galleys and e-galleys now, I guess they have, and that kind of thing. So that's another resource that can be used.
And I think it benefits the authors, because then during the event they have questions that they've already formed. They've already met and discussed the book, and they can come and talk to you and ask you some informed questions.
Yeah, that's always very cool.
It's nice, yeah, because normally I'm friends with Ann Patchett, and she wrote a lovely essay once for Harper's about being on book tour, or for The Atlantic, about being on book tour, and she said, whatever book tour you're on, you're answering questions about your previous book, because people haven't had time to catch it up. So you're answering questions from the book you wrote 6 years ago, not the one that's out now. So it's always lovely when there are people in the audience who are totally with you, up to date on what you've just done.
As long as they don't ruin the ending of the book.
Yeah. Exactly. Nobody tell me how Jane Eyre ends. She's an alien.
No, she's a zombie.
I think right now. How sparkly is Mr. Rochester? Anyway,
I think it ends with, reader, I ate his brain.
Someone's writing the fan fiction right now. So, well, I mean, it's actually a great point that you raise, that the point with a book club is, you're both presumably about to go on tour where you're trying to persuade people to buy the book. Whereas when you're having this kind of interaction with readers, they've already spent the money. They're already there, and they want to talk about the themes in the book. They want to talk about what they've read. And actually, a lot of the time, they want to talk about something else, almost, that you have inspired in them, or that the book has reminded them of, or brought out in them in some way. Perhaps this is an opportunity to make the people at Penguin and Harper's very happy. Why don't you tell us briefly about what your next book is about, and what kinds of conversations do you think they might lead to?
I'm sure that everywhere publicists are smiling at that question. Thank you very much. So my new book is called The Signature of All Things, And it is a novel, and I don't expect for everybody to know this about me because I know that Eat, Pray, Love was year zero. But prior to that, prior to being a memoirist, I was a novelist. I was a fiction writer. My first book was a collection of short stories, and then I wrote a novel. It's all I had ever wanted to do or be with my life. And then, as anybody who has $12 to buy a paperback knows, my life imploded, and I used my writing for another purpose, which was to kind of write my way out of the hole that I had found my way into. And I'm very happy to have done that, but I looked up and 12 years had passed and I hadn't written a word of fiction. So, and I felt as though I were, neglecting some very important fundamental part of myself. So I wanted to write, I think you should write the book that you would like to read. I think that's always a good rule. And I love my ignorance of the Brontes notwithstanding, I love 19th century. I love 19th century fiction. It is my favorite. I love Dickens, Trollope, Eliot, Austen. I wanted to write a missing George Eliot book, basically, so I have written this. It's a big, giant, multi-generational. I don't know if I'm allowed to use the word. It's a big book, and it's about. It's about 19th century botanical exploration, and it follows the fortunes of a family who I invented, but who I hope are very plausible, called the Whitakers, who are, Henry Whitaker, the patriarch of the family, is kind of a botanical thug, who has gone out in the world and not so much learned botany as conquered it, and has become one of the New World's first millionaires in the early pharmaceutical trade, made his money in the quinine trade. And his daughter Alma is born into this family of rarefied money and wealth and intelligence, and she becomes a botanist in her own right. And so it's about botany. It's sort of set all over the world. There's a lot of travel in it, a lot of exploration. It's about the beginnings of the evolution debate, the beginnings of that schism between religion and science. It's about women's place in science. It's about love and lost love. And foremost for me, I wanted to write a novel that felt like a 19th century novel, but didn't have one of the two resolutions of a 19th century novel about women, which is that you either get the good marriage and the happy ending, or you are under the train. You're ruined by some sensual mistake that you made, and you're destroyed. And that's really kind of the only choices. And I wanted to investigate what it's like for what I feel like women's lives are really like, which is that most of us are capable of withstanding enormous disappointments and having really interesting lives anyway. And so I'm quite in love with my character, Alma Whitaker. She's a force of nature, and it's a birth to death story, which I've always wanted to do as well. And I feel like, I think history will disagree, but I feel like it's the book of my life. I think we all know that other people will say differently, but for me, this book is, I'm really passionate about it and really excited about it. And it's coming out October 1st.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's some great discussions of creationism, botany, and but more of women's place in history and
science. I feel like send it to your gardening club. It's a lot about plants, a lot about travel, colonialism, abolition. All the sort of big themes of the 19th century. I tried to put in there. So.
Sounds great.
Thank you. I hope that you like it.
Well, I already love it. I'm about 70 pages in.
Oh, you've met Henry then.
I have indeed. And I'm already, I can't wait to get in the car on the way home, and I won't be driving.
Oh, good. I'm glad to say. I was concerned.
But also, may I just say that I hope you do the audio book, because doesn't she have a great voice?
She does.
Oh, I hope you give me your phone number so that when I get all agitated, I can call up and just your voice will calm me right down. Yeah. No, it's
I'm very heavily sedated, Wally, so that's why it's just a big misunderstanding.
Yeah. Anyway, so my new book is called We Are Water, and it goes back to the genesis goes back a little bit before 2008. Maybe I'm like a total music head, and every book that I've done, including the two I've done with my incarcerated students at the women's prison, has had a connection with music of some kind, with a song. And so I collect song titles, and I was here in New York seeing this little off-Broadway play about that was. Do some of you know Patty Griffin, the musician? She's kind of an Americana singer and songwriter, and I love her stuff. And so they were doing a little play, a little musical based on her music, on her story songs. And one of which that I had never heard before was called We Are Water. And I thought to myself, oh, We Are Water, I wonder what that means. And so I wrote it down on a little slip of paper and put it in a file, and one day I found it, and it was sort of like, oh, We Are Water, yeah, that's right. So then shortly after that, I finished a little funny Christmas book called Wishin' and Hopin', which was my comic relief book after my Columbine book. I had to kind of remind myself that life has a sunny side as well. And I was out promoting that, and I was in my hometown of Norwich, Connecticut, which, by the way, when you think, when somebody says Connecticut, you think of, Westport, Fairfield. It's called Gold Coast, Connecticut. Leafy bedroom towns and prep school and country club. No, I'm not from Pate, Connecticut. I'm from Liverwurst, Connecticut. We're on the other side. We like the Red Sox and all that. But anyway, so I'm doing this interview for Wishin' and Hopin' in my hometown, and the announcer said, and I'm still in recovery from this book, and the announcer said, "So what's next for Wally Lamb?" And I had to come up with an answer, kind of like what I did with Gladys Swan. And so I said, oh, well, maybe I'll write about the flood. And when you say the flood in Norwich, Connecticut, you mean the 1963 flood. I was I think 11 or 12, and at a popular park at the northern end of town, there was a dam that was holding back a lake. And on a very cold March night, after 2 days of rain, this earthen dam collapsed, and it sent all these millions of gallons of water rushing down, devastated the city, and also took the lives of house pets and 5 human beings. Now, one of those I remember reading about, and I should say also that the flood water came very close to my house. So I remember as a kid walking down with my mother and looking at this sort of unbelievable maelstrom, sort of rushing past it with these big chunks of ice from the lake. There was the size of refrigerators, and cars were floating past you and so forth. But the story that I remember most of all was the story of 3 little boys who, with their mother and father, the parents were in their 20s, and they had just found out that the dam had burst, and they were in the path of the dam, and they were going to outrun the water. So they got in their car. Their children, three little boys, were 4, 2, and infant, and unfortunately, they did not outrun the water. The water lifted their car and took it over a 10-foot wall, and they went down and they went under, somehow got out of the car and swam to there was like a low roof for a storage roof, I guess, that was next to a tree. And the father has the mother is handing the 3 children up to the father who was on the roof, and then they were in the process of getting the kids to the tree, which was higher. And just as the husband reached down they got the 3 kids up there, and then just as the husband reaches down for his wife, the water takes her away and she drowns. So here are these 3 little boys who have no mother. It was just a story of devastation. Anyway, We Are Water, the flood. I end up writing about that flood, researching it, and in the process of researching it, I find those 3 little boys who are now middle-aged men in their early 50s. I think one of them may be in his 40s still. And the oldest boy, who was 4, has been obsessed with this story all his life, and had indeed started writing the non-fictional version of this, pieced together from these little things. The family didn't talk about it much because it was so painful. But anyway, we became friends, and I became friends with his brothers. They didn't remember anything about their mother or that night, but Tom, the oldest boy, he did have memories of going under the water. And he said, in my 4-year-old mind, it seemed more exciting than anything else. until, you know, he realized the full extent of it. Anyway, so we became friends, and we convened, the three brothers and I, at the dam site, and the dam still is there, but it's, you know, now very much fortified and built up. And we walked the flood path to where the tree was. The tree they found, we were able to find the tree where they had been rescued from. So that was one of the origins of the story. The other one is another Norwich, Connecticut thing. A guy who was killed or died of an accident when I was about 8 years old. He was an outsider artist, an African-American guy, a laborer, who began to paint obsessively in his middle age and wasn't sure why he was doing it. He was untrained, unschooled, but he came up with these fabulous pictures. But he was also controversial in the town because he had had the audacity to marry a white wife, a black guy marrying a white woman in Norwich, Connecticut, 1950s, became a target. And so his death, officially, it was an accident, but the black community in town was sure that he was murdered. What happened was he couldn't sell paintings in his own life, but he was rediscovered in the 1980s, and now he's highly collectible and has, you know, as sometimes happens with art and artists, he's very well known at this point. Ellis Rooley was his name. So I take Ellis Rooley and I make him younger and turn him into a character named Josephus Jones. And then I take one of the little boys in the flood and turn him into a little girl and then grow her up, and she herself becomes a successful artist. And at the beginning of the story, she makes a decision to leave her husband for a woman. And the story, the arc of the story is about the repercussions of that decision, particularly with their 3 grown children and themselves. But the story has within it the Ellis Rooley story and also the flood story. And so I guess I was describing this the other day, that what happened with me with this story is that if you think of it as an electricity experiment, here's one pole, you know, the flood. Here's the other pole, Ellis Rooley. They really had nothing to do with each other except that they were both happening in my hometown in different times. But what happened is that between these poles, the electricity started jumping back and forth, and the electricity became the arc of the story. And so that's where it started, and that's what it turned into. I don't know. I don't know if are you an outliner? Do you know where your story's going? Because I never do.
Depends on the story. I also just have to say I'm almost finished with it.
Oh my gosh.
And it's really great.
Oh, thank you.
It is really, really great and vivid and brave and kind of a little like it kind of makes your skin hurt. You know, like it's intense.
Yeah.
It's an intense and beautiful novel. So
Thank
I
you.
recommend it completely.
Thank you.
But it depends on. It depends on the book. This book was very much so in a way that I've never done before because I was intimidated by writing a historical novel. I was intimidated by the amount of research that I had to do to unfold the mysteries of 19th century botanical history. And I over-prepared. And I hadn't written fiction in 12 years. And I was afraid that it was like a foreign language that I had lost the ability to speak. So I did what you do when you're learning a new language, and I had to learn a new language, which was to try to write convincingly from a century and a half ago. So I spent 3 years just immersing myself. I'm only reading 19th century memoirs, journals, letters, novels, studying this world of botany. And the story kind of came through. I had a general idea for the story, but in the research I discovered more. And then I sat down and wrote a very long and detailed outline, which I've never done before. But I felt as if I didn't do that, I was going to lose. I was trying to hold together so much in the book that I felt I had to had to pin it down so that it could be safe to then write. So I did do it this time.
I think there's something really interesting in that, but the fact that both of you, obviously they're both fiction, but yet they're based on certain historical time periods, and that certainly when it comes to talking to readers and having conversations in come the fall, I would imagine there's a lot of historians are going to want to talk to you about your interpretation. There's a lot of people who remember either the artist or the flood or both, are definitely going to want to come forward and tell their own stories and almost want to add their stories onto what you've told.
Yeah, because I did another radio show at that same radio station, and that's exactly what happened. I mentioned that I had started writing that book about the flood, and for the next hour, people called in and gave their memories of where they were and what happened, and yeah.
Yours is braver because it's recent history, and so you'll be challenged, I would assume, very directly. And like, I don't think anybody from Captain Cook's third voyage is going to challenge me on,
It'd be a good story.
yeah, exactly, on my descriptions of I think I'm safe, which is another reason.
Who has a phone?
Run!
I think we're good.
I blame myself automatically. I think
Hopefully the buzzing will
maybe that's somebody from Captain Cook's third voyage.
coming in.
How dare you!
Change my seat.
Well, let's open it up to the audience here. I would love to hear your thoughts on reading in groups, on what kinds of things you feel work in book clubs. Can we just have a show of hands first? Who here is a member of a book club?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's the majority.
Great.
Well done. Great. So if you have a question, I don't think there are microphones, so I'll probably repeat the question before it's answered. Yes, there's one over here. Yes.
I wanted to ask about social media. I have a lot of friends who are writers and nonfiction, and everyone's kind of struggling with the question of how do you keep from being swallowed up by social media? You know, with your Facebook page, whether you're on Twitter, whether you have a blog, your website, or some other group, Goodreads, you're communicating with readers. At some point, you sort of cut yourself off and focus on writing your novel for a certain amount of time that some writers do. How do you cope with this? And I think this is what people, when I meet my writer friends, we used to talk about. We talk about our ebook world, how terrible they are, but mostly people are talking about what they're doing without Twitter and Facebook and all these things, and how they can't get anything done because they're getting sucked into it, and they're reading Twitter and then not just putting up their own stories. So how do you cope with all that?
Thank you. It's a great question. The question was about social media as a writer. I mean, how do you not get too involved in it and keep writing? How do you create that balance?
So I actually have a really quick response to that, just from a community management perspective. You don't need to be every single place all the time. You can find the platform that speaks to you and to your audience, and the one that you're comfortable with, and sort of focus on that. And every platform has its own benefits. You know, on Facebook, you can do sort of an Ask Me Anything type chat. On Twitter, you can send a lot of quick bursts and tips and have sort of not really a timeline on your conversation there. And on Tumblr, you can put up great photos. So you should never feel pressured to just be everywhere at once.
And I actually have something to add too, which is that I know a lot of writers, including myself, who get addicted to the social media aspect of it. And there are some apps that can help you with that. There's one in particular called Freedom that shuts off the internet for a given amount of time that you select so that you can focus.
That's great.
Which, yeah, it's a lifesaver. But there are some.
Can they come to your house and take Breaking Bad off your off your Netflix list as well?
Someone should work on that. But yeah, so there are apps that can help if you end up becoming addicted. Which
Yeah, there's another one there called Rescue Time I use sometimes, where
Yeah.
you can only block certain sites, so you can
Yeah.
still research, but
Exactly.
you can't get onto Facebook or Netflix. What are the tactics you use?
How I do it, I used to, when our kids were still kids and living in the house, I hired out an apartment. It was actually it became my work office, but it's the second floor of a two-family house in a neighborhood where we used to live. And I have an elderly landlady who lives downstairs. Her name is Bunny, and for an 80-something-year-old woman, she is unnervingly seductive, you know. So I still have my office there, and I have a million
Well, her
bunnies.
name is Bunny.
I have a million bunny stories that we don't have time to tell, but anyway, but I still have my office and I do business stuff there. In our home where I write now, I've got two computers. I've got a big, standalone computer, the traditional kind, in the basement, and that's where I do my creative work, and I am not connected to the internet. However, if I go up 2 flights of stairs, I have a laptop that is connected to the internet, and so I can do, if I need to know, what was the big movie of 1961, I could run upstairs and find out, that kind of research, and then I go back down again. So, but I find it's important, and I'm sort of lurching a little bit toward addiction with the social media, and I have to really be careful of that.
Yeah.
So as long as I stay downstairs, where where I should be during the workday, then I'm cool with it.
I love these like Odyssean, these obstacles where you have somebody tie you to the mast. Yeah. Like that's what those apps are like. I want to hear the siren song, but I don't want to go into the rocks. I have a feeling it's a question obviously that people talk about a lot right now, which is social media good or bad for us? Are smartphones good or bad for us? Mm-hmm. Is the internet good? Is 24-hour wired in good or bad for us? And I feel like it's almost the wrong question, because I think. I don't think that any of these things have a moral identity in and of themselves. They are just neutral, very powerful sources. It's just a power source, all of that. It's like the sun or money. It's not good or bad, it's how it's used and what you do with it. And so whenever I start to blame the internet or social media for distracting me, I'm like, it's not doing anything to you. It's just, it's available to you for whatever you want to do with it. You can fall down into that rabbit hole, or you can try to use it as a way to bring light and goodness to your life and other people's lives in no more than 45 minutes a day, and so I also have a little hourglass on my desk that I use a lot. I try to make a rule, unless I'm writing, in which case I do want, there's a great Yiddish term, sitzfleisch, which means the flesh on your ass. And it's something that you need in order to be an artist of any kind. You have to have enough of it that you can sit for a long time comfortably. And I've heard people say I can't be a writer, I don't have enough sitzfleisch, I don't have enough butt flesh to do it. So unless I'm actually
It's Captain Cook again.
It is, man. I'm in danger. So I have a little hour. It's like a timer from it's a little bigger than a Boggle timer. I think it's about 5 minutes, and I try to just sit at my desk and flip it, and then make sure that I don't flip it more than 3 times. So whether it's doing emails or because you look up and next thing you know you're like, who was the Sports Illustrated swimsuit cover model in 1982? And you're like, so it makes you walk away, and so I insist that I have to walk away before I'm allowed to flip it a 3rd time, and sometimes that walking away will interrupt the spell.
I'd like to add one quick thing, which is I think that there's a myth that every writer needs to be on social media, because there are some authors who really shouldn't be on there, who don't know how to use it, or who need to learn and be better about it, because it's not a billboard to just say, read my book, read my book, read my book. It's a community, and it's a place where where authors need to interact with their readers. But there are some people who, if you're going to sign up for Twitter and never even really use it, or create a blog and never really update it, that's worse than not having a social media account. So I don't think it's for everyone.
Yeah, and for any audience as well, people say, YA authors definitely need to be on there, but Suzanne Collins isn't on any of that.
Right.
And she's the best-selling YA author right now.
Yeah.
Yes, there was a question there, yes.
I was just going to ask if there is any famous author that doesn't use any of that.
I think there's lots.
Plenty of them, plenty of
Yeah.
famous. The question is if there are famous authors who don't use any of that stuff. Lots and lots of them.
Yeah.
Part of the inherent aspect of being a writer is that you get to sit in a room on your own. You don't have to interact with people.
Yeah.
So
I heard that Jonathan Franzen, when he was writing, his famous book, he actually put he must have good keyboard strategies, because he actually put a cloth over his head so he could sort of imagine things, and he would keyboard the story with,
Like in a hood?
like with it sort of over his eyes and
Like a
everything.
falcon?
Yeah. Which immediately, when I heard that story, and I think it's true, but I think I read an interview where he said that.
Explains a lot.
But my inclination was immediately to want to go to Jonathan Franzen's house and go to his, near his ribs and go, hi.
But it's so tuned into the personality, right?
Yes,
Because you were
yes,
both so
yeah.
conversational, and I can totally see you sitting at home and turning the hourglass and answering 5 questions, and this is great.
Yeah.
And also someone like John Green, who his entire community is on the internet ready
Yeah.
to fight for him at any
Or Neil
second.
Gaiman.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Example.
Yeah.
But then there are some authors that I just want to read, and I don't necessarily
Wanna
need
know
to
them.
chat
Yeah.
with them every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very rare that I read a book that I love and then say, right, I want to follow them on Twitter or anything.
Exactly.
It's
Yeah.
like, no, I want to have the book experience
Yeah.
with them and maybe meet them.
I find, because I was a teacher for so long, I find writing sometimes to be a very lonely life. I mean, I like the solitude, but sometimes it feels lonely, and so I like that interactiveness.
When it starts to feel too much like The Shining, it's
Yeah.
good to get on to get on Facebook and look at pictures of cute cats. It just it helps.
I mean, there are some authors as well who are writing fiction on these platforms.
Yes. Right.
It's agents don't necessarily like it because you can't sell that very easily, but
Yeah.
but there are some who've even put out compilations of their Twitter.
Yeah.
Isn't
Famous
Lydia
as well.
Davis going to write a short story? Or I read something about Lydia Davis is going to use Twitter to...
Yeah, she said that. Well, she said she would be interested, and then it got turned into a lot.
Do you mind if I'm just thinking of a story that I should have told about. We're talking about group, the sort of collective group of book experiences, but we did something this year with my book that was just turned out to be kind of a lifesaver. That was less about wanting. Like the fans kind of saved my ass, to be honest, which was that, and anybody who's in the book publishing world or around it knows that the disputes between authors and publishers over covers can become very heated. And I found myself with my publishers who I love, but we were in an impasse over the cover of this new book. And it was almost like a relationship destroying impasse. I mean, we've had a very good relationship for many years, but we just got entrenched. Entrenched to the point where people were flying in for meetings from over, like it got really heavy. And it's the definition of subjective. We were all just arguing about what was better, and it's a completely subjective question. And I went to what was supposed to be the final meeting that was really going to be, like I approached this meeting like this is going to be the showdown where I'm actually going to throw my weight around and I'm going to demand and insist to have the cover that I like. And then I realized, but I don't know if it's the best one. I just know it's the one that I like. And so I went to this meeting and said, would you guys mind if I brought this to my Facebook page? And we took 3 of these covers and asked the readers which ones they like, because we're arguing about something that only they can answer. We're arguing about
That's a
which
great
one
idea.
the readers will like, and we have all these readers who would be very happy to tell us. And so we did this cover contest. I don't know if any of you in this room were part of that, choosing that. And I want to thank you for choosing the one that I like.
Yay!
But thank you so much. It was so gratifying, and it was also, for me, it's like, well, why don't we just ask instead of saying to the reader, like, here I'm presenting you with this thing that we decided for you. Why don't we see what one you would prefer? And it was such a great encounter.
That's a great idea.
It was really,
So
really, really
smart,
fun.
because I can't tell you as a bookseller how important the cover of a book is and in getting people to pick up the book.
And people
I'm a
care,
cover
and they got
lunatic.
passionate,
Yeah.
and they got like intense about it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
the fight left the rooms, the fluorescent lighting of Viking. We were sitting here having this little argument, and then people got to take that argument into their own homes, and it was really revealing the responses, and I was really surprised by the response. And it was also really interesting because one of the cover that I didn't want was the cover with a woman's figure on it from the back, which is sort of something that you see a lot these days in
Yes.
book jackets. And it was amazing to see how divisive that cover was. I think it was good market research for Viking too, to see that while there were people who loved it, the people who didn't like it were offended by it. Like they were like, I would never touch a book that had this cover. Like, why do we never see book jackets with men seen from the back? Why is it always women seen from the back? Why can't they have a face? Why can't, and it became this really passionate argument. So I think that's probably been the most satisfying encounter that I've had on social media, and also was a really lovely way for those readers to justifiably feel as though they had a hand in the production of the book, which they totally did. So thank you, voters.
Can I ask you folks a question? Do you mind?
Please, please.
Have any of you who are active in book clubs done a Skype book club? Had that experience with a writer whose work that you're reading? Because I've done a couple of those, and they're really fun. It's almost like being in the room without having to travel.
We did an open chat, just over the telephone.
Right.
When we first did our book club, and he was actually from Canada, and we coordinated the time. So that was like very interesting, but I felt pressured in the sense that I needed to be more prepared. Because you know how you get like overwhelmed, like, do I have a question? Do I not have a question?
Yeah.
So
Either more prepared or drink a little less of the wine.
I think more wine would probably be better.
I have a. Do you guys all drink wine at your book clubs? Is that just part of it? That's sort of.
Are the books an
assumed.
excuse? I mean, we can be honest.
Is it really a wine club?
There's a question here.
I think I'm the only one who doesn't drink wine at my book club, so it's just so you know, I'm the designated driver. The reason I wanted to question that is what we did was, I think that is intimidating to Skype in an author, although I would love to Skype in you at any time. But we did use electronic media. We'll download something that you had spoken at or something that you had presented at, and I will download it and I'll bring it to the book club. That's less intimidating than having you sit there going, oh, do I remember what I read about? I really loved it, but do I remember what I want to ask you? But I would love to have that.
Plus, as a former high school teacher, I could come with a test.
I know.
Oh, that's doubly intimidating.
Plus, when you Skype in, you don't have to wear pants.
Right.
Very simple.
Didn't even occur to me that I shouldn't.
Can I ask about what happens when you encounter readers who have something quite antagonistic to say about your book, or very negative, or feel like you made the wrong choice with the characters in some way? How is that as an author to deal with that kind of encounter?
Well, they don't tend to come to the signings. You know what I mean? It's a lot of, you got to get a babysitter, and you got to come. I mean, if you're just going to come there to be, you got to really hate it. If you're going to take the effort to go to a bookstore
But if it's a book club where they've all decided they're
Right.
going to read the book, they've all bought it, they've read the book, and they go, I didn't really like it, and we've got the author coming in, what's...
I don't know. I don't feel as though everybody's required to like it.
Yeah, no, I don't either.
I think that's very fine. I mean, really, to each his own. I tend to encounter that more on the Amazon page than I would in a book club, because I think also people are a little polite in person, and they won't say what they will say on Amazon. And I marvel as a reader, as a very passionate reader, who will stop reading books that I hate immediately. I marvel that people will stay with a book that they hate. And I often want to say, why are you doing this to yourself? If I hated a book as much as you hate my book, I would have given it up on 10 pages in. But you just are saturating yourself in loathing. Go read a book you like, Enjoy your life. You don't have to read this.
If I'm doing a book club or appearing before, at a bookstore or something, I like it when people challenge me. Like I very often will get a question like, why did you have to kill off Maureen? And that gives me that opens the opportunity for me to say, well, it's not like that for me. I'm not strategizing because I don't outline. I'm not sort of, presupposing that she's going to die. It's just that when I'm writing that part and all of a sudden she has a brain aneurysm, she has it. And I don't necessarily feel like I have made the decision so much as I have seen it happening in the story. I work in writers groups. Do you?
I did.
Yeah.
Years ago. Yeah.
I still do. I'm active in 2 writers groups, and of course you get all kinds of feedback in writers group. And sometimes my rule of thumb is to, I never take part in the discussion of my own work when I present it. I just try to, I'm furiously writing down what everybody says. But I am having an emotional reaction as I'm scrolling down. Now, I will sometimes think to myself as I'm writing what this comment is, yeah, what do you know? You know, but I find that 2 days later, it's exactly what I needed to hear. I just needed to hear it in a less emotional state. I'll just quickly tell you that when I was starting She's Come Undone, I had only been writing it for about a year. I know "only" sounds, but it took me 9 years, so and I read it at a college reading, and when I did the Q&A, this guy stands up in the back and he said, "Why would we want to follow a character that horrible through a whole novel?" And he was talking about my character Dolores in She's Come Undone, and I felt I was writing as if I were she in the story, but what I was really feeling was parental toward her. But I realized that he didn't understand because I had not yet come up with her childhood. I didn't start chronologically with that book. So his comment and my reaction to it made me go back in time in Dolores' story and figure out who she had been as a kid. And so ultimately, even though it hurt a little bit to hear a question framed that way, I was grateful for it.
Why can't characters be more likable?
Yeah.
Well, that's the big debate lately,
exactly.
yeah.
More questions? Yes, here.
I have a question, like, this is my first meeting of real book lovers, so I'm thrilled looking at my age because I've gone
thank
this
you.
long. So I'm curious, when you're sitting to write a book that takes, 9 years or however many years, do you force how does that work in a regular day? Do you say, okay, I'm coming to the computer at 8 o'clock and I'm going to sit here until 5 o'clock, and how do you do that?
Did you hear the question over there? Can you hear? Okay, great.
I grew up with a Swedish mother who was very disciplined, and I am by nature somebody who, left to my own devices, will take 3 naps a day while eating. I'm so grateful that I was raised by somebody who would not permit me to be the person who I am. She just was not going to have a lazy child, even though I was a lazy child. And I grew up she just kept me going, and must have been exhausting for her because I was just a force of inertia, and she just, I grew up with lists and itineraries and agendas, and I was forgetful, and I was daydreamer, and I was a crybaby. I mean, I was just such a weak kid, and she just wouldn't have it. And up until 5th grade, there was a list on I probably shouldn't tell you this, but anyway, there was a list on our bathroom mirror that said Liz's list, and it said brush teeth, wash face, comb hair, because I couldn't handle to remember the 3 things. And we took piano lessons, and it was all done by timing. She was just a very organized person, and somehow she just beat it into me that nothing gets done unless there's a list, unless there's a schedule, unless there's a timer, unless it's by the clock, unless you make it happen. And it is due to piano practice with the kitchen timer to 30 minutes that you don't get to stand up until it dings that I learned to do the same as a writer. And so I can only credit my mother with teaching me that you put a sign-in sheet, you sit down and you make a commitment that you will not be standing up from that desk. And it's very hard at the beginning. I mean, once the book starts flowing toward the end, then you have to almost discipline in the other direction, which is that you have to force yourself to get up and walk away because you're going to start getting sloppy.
Yes.
So you have to say, I will only write for 3 hours, and then I'm going to stop so that I have something tomorrow. Whereas at the beginning, to make yourself write for that 1 hour a day can be excruciating. But I don't know. I got that Scandinavian discipline, so it works.
There's definitely a momentum to the storytelling. It does rev up after a while,
Yeah.
and it gets a lot less hard to show up at the desk. I grew up with an Italian mother, and so I ate 7 times a day, even while I was napping, and had to clean my plate.
Lucky.
But I was old when I started writing, and I didn't know I wanted to start writing fiction. I was 30, and we had just started having our kids, and I would write on weekends early in the morning. I'd get up, I'd set the alarm for 4:30, where sane people on Saturday morning and Sunday morning were still in bed. And I would grab my notebooks. I was writing in longhand, and I lived near the University of Connecticut. And so I would drive up to the all-night study room in the library, and there'd be like a couple of Asian kids asleep in their calculus notes, and me. And I would stop at the convenience store on the way in, get this size coffee, and I would write for a couple of hours. And then, of course, I could write during summer vacations. So I kind of learned discipline that way because I didn't have the sort of loosey-goosey schedule that I have now as a full-time writer. But I find that my creativity is a morning thing to an early afternoon thing. My creative brain, now you write too, right, Michelle? I don't know. Some people write into the night. That never worked for me. I couldn't study into the night too. I could set the alarm for 4 a.m. on the day of a test, but I couldn't study into the night, and I can't write. So I like to get up early. I do that naturally. I like to get in some exercise before I start. There's something about the blood flow and shower water too. I tell you, the shower is a very creative place for me in the morning. And then I start. I usually start around 8:30, 9 o'clock, and we'll go till about maybe early afternoon. On a bad day, I'll go up and watch Days of Our Lives.
That's a bad day for anybody.
Yeah, right. Do you have something against good twin and evil twin stories?
No, I just have my own guilty secrets I don't want to share.
Wally, I think I just officially fell in love with you. I love that it's Days of Our Lives.
We've heard a lot over the few days about self-publishing, digital publishing, ebooks, social media. My question for you guys is, what advice would you give to aspiring novelists trying to navigate now, which is a very different world than when we started?
Could you hear the question over there? Okay, I'll repeat it. She was asking about, over the last few days, there's been a lot of talk about self-publishing and different forms of publishing. So the questioner was wondering what kind of advice for an aspiring novelist or a beginner novelist they would have about the industry and sort of getting into that. Is that fair? Great.
I think ultimately it comes down to good storytelling, which in my definition is character-driven storytelling. With that same woman who told me not to write for preconceived audiences, Gladys Swan, she also told me, and I'm going to do her imitation because I do it well. She says, Wally, you're never going to tell a completely original story because all the stories that people need have been in the culture forever and ever. And she said, the best you can do is put your own spin on the archetypal story. And I looked at her dopily and I said, well, what do you mean? What should I read? And she said, go back and read ancient myths. She said, all you need is there. She said, it's not an accident that those stories have lasted through the ages. And the reason why is that people need them to be told and retold over and over again by whoever is alive at the time. And so my answer to that, I think, to come to a big convention like this and hear all about the new trends and everything, I think it's great, and I think it's important. But in the end, what drives story is not social media, it's not technology, it's the characters. Mm-hmm. So don't get so wrapped up in all of this stuff. This is all the vehicle by which story is delivered, but story is what's important.
That's a great answer. I would add to it that I think everybody's looking for the pathway. And for somebody, now I've been doing this for 25 years, I've never wanted to be anything other than a writer since I can remember. And I've been hearing for my whole life that there's no way. That there's no way to be a writer, that it's impossible, that it's like, almost like the impression that I've always been given, and it's no different today than ever, is that it's like taxi medallions in New York. You know, they only have like 100, or like liquor licenses. And once they're taken, they're not taking anybody else. And in fact, that is not the truth. The truth is that if you write something magnificent, they will clear off space on the bookshelf for you, and they will make a book out of it somehow. There'll be room made, and that can come in many forms. And I think that, as you say, the important thing is to focus on the narrative. But I mean, for years I've been telling people that it is, you know, it's almost like when you're trying to find an affordable apartment in New York City. It is not possible. There are not any, but people find them. You know, it's the same thing with publishing. It is not possible to get published, and yet they do. People do every single day, and they do in ways that are very unexpected. My very dearest friend in the world just published her first book at the age of 54, having never written anything even 3 years ago, and got a big book deal with Viking and has a fantastic memoir out there. And she didn't do any of the things I did, you know. So her path is utterly different. So I feel like I can't tell you what the path is. I can only tell you that you can find it. And I don't know whether that will be through social media, through self-publishing, through traditional agents, through book publishing. I just know that I stand as a testament that it can occur. And I see it occurring again and again and again.
Andrew, do we have time for me to tell a quick story?
If it's very quick.
Yeah, okay, all right. When She's Come Undone was published, 1992, I got my first piece of reader mail. And it was from a guy who signed himself David F. Shalom David F. It said at the end. And he said, I'm I'm emotionally disturbed. I really fell in love with your character. I found that she was fighting my fight for me. He was a cutter, self-mutilator. And his letter was funny, and it was poignant, and I somehow, through accidental circumstances, was able to get his last name and his address, which was the Institute of Living in Hartford, Connecticut. And I wrote back, and we wrote to each other for about 20 years. And his letters were so entertaining, I kept saying, you should be a writer, you should be a writer. Oh, I can't, I take Thorazine, I'm 300 pounds. I don't, I'd be too embarrassed, to be in public and so forth. One day, he shows up at a reading that I was giving, and he's well, and he's this vibrant, this is about 20 years later, he is vibrant, he's found the right combinations of medication and brain maturity and so forth, and I didn't know who he was, and he said, I took your advice, and I entered a writing program, and I'm going to write about my mental illness and coming out of it. He does. It gets published, and it's called Sharp. He is David Fitzpatrick, and I had the honor of doing a book event with him here in New York City when his thing came out. So, and ultimately, the book club is a chance for the writer and the reader to somehow come together, even though the writer is in a room by himself or herself, and the reader is some entity that you are writing toward and for. Ultimately, it's all about communication. It's about being pulled together instead of isolated.
Yeah, that's a wonderful note to end on. This being a discussion on book clubs, we have gone the stereotypical route and we have wine and cheese. Not for designated drivers.
And you don't have to wear pants.
First of all, please thank our four panelists.
Thank you.